Here we have a planer. The planer is used to reduce the thickness of your stock. It won't get rid of any cups, twists, or bows or anything like that. So you need to make sure your incoming material is pretty good before you start. The minimum size you can run through the planer is 7 to 8 inches. So if the parts on your product were going to be little panels like this, you could run these through, but it's a much better idea to take an entire board and plane the entire board down and then cut your pieces out afterwards. A, this is much faster and easier for you to work with and manage your parts. And B, every time you run the parts through, you get snipe on the end of the board. It's minimal in most cases, but if you plane the entire board, you only get snipe on the end. Versus if you were to plane these, and then each board would have snipe on the end of each one of these, so it would just have more air. Snipe's not typically a big issue. However, if you're going to be taking material like this and then gluing them together, and there were to be snipe on the ends of this, you would see two little cusps on the end that you really couldn't get rid of by sanding, because the board would be mostly flat, and then it'd be a divot on the ends. So in cases like this, you definitely don't want snipe, but in general, it's better to plane an entire board. You can reduce the effects of snipe. There are wheel locks over here that you can tighten. Every time you make an adjustment, you have to loosen it, lower it down, and then tighten it. You don't really need to use these too much, and I obviously didn't plan on using it because it's behind this panel on the opposite side of the adjustment wheel. But you can lock it if you're having a lot of issues. The next consideration when using a planer is if you have tear out when you're running your wood through. So oak is very forgiving. It doesn't usually tear out that much. When you run oak through here, in most cases, if you sand it just a little bit, it'll be fine. Some cases you don't need to sand it at all. However, other materials like maple, even walnut, cherry, these type of materials, you can often get tear out as you're planing it. Tear out occurs when the wood grain, so you can see this pattern in this case, if the pattern is going to where that the grain is coming up like this, as it runs through, it'll rip off some of the wood grain as it runs across there. If the wood grain is going this way, it'll kind of just clean it off nicely. Versus trying to learn how to read the stock, it's much easier just to plane your stock. If you have tear out, just make sure you spin it around and run it through again. And then that way you'll get rid of the tear out. You do need to run the parts through the planer with the grain running the direction that you're going to be planing. So in this case, the grain is running along this length, so I'll run it through here. This board here is kind of odd. Someone had glued up a really short panel. So the wood grain is running this direction. You might be tempted to plane it this way, but that's not only bad for the cutters, it'll cause lots of tear out. So you need to make sure you're planing in the direction of the wood grain. I'm now ready to begin planing some stock. Before I do anything, I'll first make sure the dust collector's on. This is going to remove a lot of material. After that, I'm going to set the height of the planer. In order to adjust the height, I could use the digital readout here, but it's not always correct. So I'll use this no-go gauge. It's basically set up that any stock would fit in here, it should be planeable. If it interferes with this gauge, then it's too tall. So I'm going to lower it until the material just fits under, the material slips under, and then I'll go about one rotation back to raise it up a little bit, and the material should be ready to run through. At this stage, when I turn on the planer itself, it's going to be too noisy to hear anything that I'm saying. So I'll go ahead and explain a little bit now, and then I'll run through the demo. When you're planing your parts, as they pass through, I'm going to flip it over after each pass. That way I'm taking the material evenly off of both sides. This will prevent or reduce cupping, twisting, or bowing of your stock. So every time I run it through, I'll flip it and run it through on the other side to take the material off evenly from both sides. Incoming stock is typically 3/4 of an inch. I would say it's fine to go down to 1/2 of an inch, but if you're planing more than 1/2 of an inch, you're planing material that's thinner than 1/2 of an inch, you should consider purchasing material that's already that thin, so you're not getting undue wear on the machine. But 3/4 inch stock, you can easily plane to 1/2 of an inch. Every time you run the stock through, you want to lower the cutter, take another pass. With a thinner piece of stock like this, you could probably go one full revolution, but with your 8-inch wide stock, you should probably go to 1/2 a revolution. So every time I would run this through, I would only go 1/2 a turn at a time. If it was this thinner piece, I could probably do a full turn. This depends on material too. Some materials are harder and softer than others. If you hear the machine bogging down, you don't want to risk damaging the machine because you have to wait longer to get it fixed anyway. So taking more lighter passes typically yields a better finished cut. So don't try to push the machine too hard. Before I turn the machine and dust collector on and begin cutting, to do a quick recap, I'm going to set the height by raising and lowering the machine. Go about one full turn back. Every pass, I'm going to just flip the stock over and cut the next side. If while using the planer you're getting lots of tear out, burn marks, or as you're running the part through, it kind of turns sideways when it starts cutting, or if when you finish planing it you can feel little grooves along the top of the surface, any one of those issues, let the instructor know. They'll try to repair the machine for you.